Hello and welcome to another video presentation for Cluster 2. And it's all about business operational planning, at the same time being able to plan for your team performance. So on the last video, I actually talk about the business plan itself and the contents of the business plan and the different sections you would need to complete. And I just want to focus on one particular section for this video, and it's all about stakeholder engagement and consultation. I want to use the learner guide specifically because as a student, it is quite important that you're familiar with how the learner guide looks. And when you're reading it, you can actually just relate to what we've discussed during the video. It makes it really easy for you to understand the content of your learner guide, which is your main resource in learning at this point. Of course, there are a lot of links and videos and different other resources that you could find. However, let's focus on this one first, and let's talk about one section on that learner guide. When you started Cluster 2, we sent you this learner guide. And I'm actually currently now on on page 14 of the guide, and I want to discuss a little bit about a very important part in business operational planning. I want to compare or provide you with some insights on my own experience in stakeholder engagement on a most recent project that I actually was involved in and I managed alongside with a stakeholder partner. Okay, so just to give you a bit of a background on the particular project that I had to be involved in, and which was part of the business operational plan, was to actually implement a new system, right? It's a change of a system or a process that we felt as a team that would be very beneficial for the organization based on its strategic plan. Okay, so now the strategic plan of the business, and this is nothing to do with Sonic, all right? So this is my own business. So the strategic plan of the business was about brand awareness, growth, and of course, continuous improvement. All right. So when you talk about continuous improvement, we want to be able to see, the increase of productivity across the board in terms of the processes that we use and the systems that we use. Now, currently, the organization that I had partnered with had very minimal use and application of technology in their process and systems, particularly in conferences and trade shows and expos. Now, when we looked at the trade show or the event that was about to occur, we thought that introducing innovation and technology into it would improve productivity, would send a message of growth in terms of, our ability to initiate projects that could basically make things more work more efficiently. So we thought of introducing a new system. Okay. So here I was. I actually had a partner in that organization, which is also I'm a member of that group, and I was invited to develop a system for them. And along the way, we noticed, because we were so very limited with time, we thought of creating a plan that would suit the limitations of timelines in terms of cost and budgeting, which is also part of planning. We had no issues with that, as we had the resources available in terms of the responsible people. You know, we had a bit of an issue in terms of the number of people we can use, but we were quite confident at that point during the planning stage that we had sufficient amount of human resources to get the systems going, get it developed, and of course implementing the system, all right, and monitoring it. So we all had all of that covered and planned out. Now, the problem that actually was on this particular plan was the stakeholder engagement plan. Okay, so I was consulted as the senior project manager of the development of the system and implementation monitoring as well. Whereas my partner, who was the governing partner, so who actually owned the organization, decided it was a good idea not to consult the exhibitors who already signed their contracts a few months prior to us implementing the system. They thought of it as something that is mandatory and that has to be done, and is only, that exhibitors not necessarily have to put their input prior to us implementing this project as we trial the system. So that was what was missing. All right. And they're basically external stakeholders, because if you look at the stakeholders, you can classify them into two. So you've got the internal stakeholders and the external stakeholders. The internal stakeholders are the one within the organization, okay, so which included myself, the ones who are actually actively working, and of course my organizational partner, and some of the other ones who are actively working on this particular plan. It also involved the software engineers that were under me, my own team, and also the team of my organizational partner. So it was a merge and it was a partnership, two different organizations together. And we both considered ourselves as internal stakeholders because we were the working group of this project, and were involved in this plan. Now, the external stakeholders are groups outside of the organization, and they interact with us in some way, such as the suppliers. Now, my suppliers would mean that because I was in charge with the marketing material, so my suppliers would definitely be the printing people. Also, my suppliers on the furniture that we were supposed to hire for booth. Okay, external suppliers of my partner were the suppliers of the expo materials, such as the booths, and also the venue. So that list just goes on and on and on. But one of the external stakeholders that were extremely important were the exhibitors who paid themselves in to be part of this expo. They were not consulted with this. To implement this, the decision was just actually came from the organization who held the expo. Okay, so now the result of this was definitely when we didn't have that plan to engage them and didn't have sufficient time to do so. We only had time to brief them and get the systems and accounts set up, to test the system, and also to be there of support to them during those expo dates. The end result was that none of them actually wanted to use the system, basically because they didn't have the time to process the change in their heads. They were not prepared. They only were told about a month prior to the expo that they had to implement the new system, right? So with that being a huge gap in the operational plan, there were the resistance to change was so bad that none of them wanted to use the system. And obviously the management decided to take that risk, okay, to not involve the stakeholders and inform them prior to us actually making that decision to get the system going. So this is a classic example of how a plan could fail. when you miss consulting. And when you say consult, it's not just about letting them know that it's going to happen, but before it actually happens, before the decision is being made, that you make the stakeholders feel that that you value their opinion, that you value their feedback, because then once they provide their feedback about the decision, okay, or in making that decision, they know that they were involved in that. You encourage commitment. You promote commitment and accountability for any collaborative task or activities that they will need to complete for this plan to actually work. So that is a very classic example of how the lack of consultation with external stakeholders or even internal stakeholders can create a major breakdown in communication, a major breakdown in productivity, and ultimately the failure of a plan and not being able to get the results and meeting your key performance metrics. Okay, so when you're actually doing business operational planning, you need to start looking at both the internal and external external stakeholders. And in that list, it's very important that you write down the amount of influence on the result of the plan. Okay, the amount of influence, the impact, as well as their contribution to it. Okay, so when you've classified that, you then know which stakeholders need to know, because it's a need to know basis. You actually just let them know without gaining their input. There are also stakeholders that you have to really try to gain their input before you make any decisions. And finally, there's also one that you don't need to let them know at all because it does not concern them. So there are three different types of decisions you have to make and categories where these stakeholders would need to belong to. Okay, and then you act accordingly. Now, there are so many different consultations in terms of projects and changes on ongoing consultation over a longer period or a shorter period. So just make sure that you have a very good plan in implementing the consultation meetings or the consultation or communication plan. And of course, you also have a good way of selecting the best method of consultation. It's not just about it's a one size fits all. You have to look at the best ways of being able to get this consultation to happen. Okay, an example once again, based on the project that I just shared, was that we identified later on that the best way of communicating to them was through phone call and face-to-face meetings. They were not very responsive with emails, especially with lengthy emails, because these external stakeholders were actually extremely into the business. They were not just directors who had the time to read through lengthy emails. These are the ones who owned the business, and they were running the business. They were actually also doing everything in the business. So they had the time element, or the availability of time was so restricted that emails were left unresponded to. And if this does get responded to, it would take days or weeks. So the response time was very limited and lengthy as well. So in terms of waiting time, all right? So I thought that the best way to have consulted them was through meetings, and they should have been given a lot of time to respond to an invite. Okay. Also could be remote meetings through Zoom. The only issue was demographically, these external stakeholders were not comfortable using Zoom or technology at all. So quite a lot of them. A few of them, we could have just put them on Zoom to reduce the amount of time and expenses that we've had to do and spend for face-to-face meetings. And we could have just reduced the number to limited number of external stakeholders that would need to attend the face-to-face meeting, and giving them a lot of options. Brainstorming session could have been a very, very good way of letting these people be involved, and letting them know what the problem is, what the opportunities were, and different ways and options that we could address certain issues, or to improve certain systems and processes, right? Or we could actually just could have selected only a few groups of people whom we think would be basically would have the time, the available time to work with us and brainstorm, and to pilot, the new system, instead of expecting for everyone to collaborate with us immediately without having the consultation meetings to occur prior to implementation. All right, so that's a very good lesson learned. It's very practical. I hope you've learned that. So when you're actually doing your planning, think about the stakeholders, think about consultation, think about how these stakeholders will actually impact and influence the result of your plan, and have a very robust plan on how to communicate this to them, and what sort of ways you can consult certain ideas, which is part of that business plan of yours, or business operational plan of yours. Thank you very much for attending and watching. And the next one would still be under cluster 2, but this time it's about key performance metrics. Thank you.